The German mine that killed 12 men didn't even explode properly. It just cracked the hull of HMS Grafton like an eggshell, and John S. Sherwood watched from his Minesweeper as grown men screamed for their mothers while the North Sea swallowed them whole. You think you understand fear? Try defusing a magnetic mine while knowing that one wrong heartbeat, literally, your own heartbeat's metal watch, could turn you into red mist. This is why you wouldn't last a day doing what Royal Navy Minesweeper Sergeant John S. Sherwood did every single morning for 5 years, May 28, 1940. The English Channel. Dawn. Most people know Dunkirk as a miracle evacuation. What they don't know is that before those little ships could save anyone, someone had to clear a path through the thousands of German mines that turned the channel into a maritime graveyard. That someone was John S. Sherwood and his crew of what the Navy quietly called expendables. You see, being a minesweeper wasn't heroic. It was mathematical. The Admiralty calculated that for every 100 mines cleared, they'd lose 3 sweepers. Acceptable losses, they called it. John S. Sherwood was part of the calculation, a number waiting to be subtracted, but here's what the mathematics didn't capture: the sound a mine makes when it scrapes along your hull. It's not dramatic. It's a whisper. Like death clearing his throat before speaking. Sherwood heard that sound 17 times during Dunkirk. 17 times he should have died. Let me paint you the picture of that first morning. The mist was so thick you couldn't see 50 yards ahead. Perfect weather for U-boats, terrible weather for spotting mines. Sherwood stood on the deck of HMS Speedwell, a converted fishing trawler that had no business being in a war zone. The ship's armor was paint. Its main defense was prayer. Its crew was 23 men who'd been fishermen 6 months ago. Contact starboard. The lookout's voice cracked. He was 19, from Portsmouth. He joined the Navy to see the world. Instead, he was seeing death float by every 12 minutes. Sherwood moved to the rail. There it was, a German EMC mine, its horns protruding like the spines of some prehistoric sea creature. 1 horn bent, your ship flooded. 2 horns bent, your ship exploded. 3 horns bent, well, nobody had survived 3 horns to tell what happened. Steady as she goes, Sherwood commanded. His voice didn't shake. It had stopped shaking after the 3rd week. That's when something inside you either breaks forever or hardens into something that isn't quite human anymore. But the real test wasn't the mines you could see. The Germans had introduced something new, magnetic mines that sat on the seabed, waiting. They didn't care if you were British or German, military or civilian. They sensed metal above them and reached up with invisible hands to crush hulls. You couldn't see them. You couldn't sweep them with conventional gear. You could only find them one way, by triggering them. That was Sherwood's job. To sail over suspected magnetic mines with an electromagnetic sweep, hoping to detonate them at a safe distance. Safe being a relative term when you're dealing with explosions that could throw a destroyer 50 feet into the air. The morning of May 29th changed everything. The evacuation was in full swing. The beaches at Dunkirk were black with men, 400,000 Allied soldiers waiting for rescue. But between them and England lay a corridor of death 10 miles wide and 20 miles long. Intelligence reported at least 2,000 mines in those waters. Maybe more. Sherwood received orders at 0300 hours. Clear a channel. Width, 200 yards. Length, 8 miles. Time available, 6 hours. Before the first evacuation ships arrived. Do the math. That's 1,600 yards of seabed to clear every hour. In waters where visibility was near zero and E-boats prowled like sharks. Where the Luftwaffe would arrive with the dawn. Where one mistake meant not just your death, but the death of thousands of soldiers who were counting on the channel. Sherwood looked at his crew. Boys, really? The oldest was 32. The youngest had lied about his age. He was 16 but swore he was 18. They all knew the odds. Minesweepers had a 30% casualty rate. 1 in 3 of them wouldn't see June. Right then, lads, Sherwood said, lighting his pipe with hands that were perfectly steady. Let's go fishing. What happened next would haunt him for 60 years. The first mine detonated at 0347 hours. Not under them, under HMS Gracie Fields, a minesweeper working the parallel channel. Sherwood watched her disappear. Not sink, disappear. One moment she was there, the next she was matchsticks and steam. 28 men. Gone. No survivors to rescue. No bodies to recover. Just oil on the water and the echo of an explosion that seemed to go on forever. Maintain course, Sherwood ordered when his own helmsman instinctively turned toward where Gracie Fields had been. But sir, there might be maintain course. There's something that breaks in a man when he has to choose between saving lives and completing the mission. Sherwood felt it break that morning. A clean snap, like a bone. He'd never be whole again, but wholeness was a luxury minesweepers couldn't afford. By 0400 hours, they'd cleared half a mile. The magnetic sweep was detecting mines every few minutes, each one a potential ship killer that had to be marked, approached, and detonated. The procedure was insane: sail toward the mine at precisely 4 knots, deploy the sweep at exactly 100 yards, reverse engines at full power the moment the mine's magnetic field was triggered, and pray the explosion happened far enough away. At 0423 hours, they miscalculated. The mine went off 40 yards from their stern. The explosion lifted HMS Speedwell's rear end completely out of the water. Sherwood was thrown against the wheelhouse, his ribs cracking like kindling. The ship came down hard, her propeller shaft bent. Taking on water, any sane captain would have abandoned the mission. But sanity, like wholeness, was a luxury they couldn't afford. Damage report. Sherwood called, blood running from a gash in his forehead. Shafts bent but functioning. We're making water in compartments 3 and 4. Pumps are managing, barely. Can we maintain 4 knots? Maybe 3, sir. 3 knots. In a channel where German E-boats could do 40. Where the Luftwaffe would arrive in 2 hours. Where every minute delayed meant more soldiers would die on the beaches. 3 knots it is. Continue sweep. But here's where the story becomes something more than heroism. At 0500 hours, with dawn breaking like a hemorrhage across the eastern sky, Sherwood spotted something that made his blood freeze. Ahead, floating in near-perfect formation, were dozens of mines. Not magnetic ones, contact mines, their horns gleaming in the first light, but these weren't randomly placed. They were arranged in a pattern. A funnel. The Germans had anticipated the clearing operation and set a trap. Any ship entering that funnel would have nowhere to go. The mines were spaced so that avoiding one would drive you into another. Full stop, Sherwood ordered. He stood at the bow, studying the pattern. Behind him, the radio crackled. The first evacuation ships were approaching. Destroyers packed with soldiers. Hospital ships full of wounded. They were counting on this channel being clear. Sir, his first officer whispered, we could mark it and go around. Let the big ships know and lose how many ships before word gets through. How many 100 men? Sherwood knew what had to be done. Someone had to sail through that funnel, triggering the mines in sequence, creating a cascade of explosions that would clear the channel. That someone would almost certainly not survive. Signal the other sweepers, Sherwood said quietly. Tell them to hold position and watch. They'll need to know the pattern for next time. Sir. We're going through. The crew fell silent. They understood. This wasn't courage anymore. This was mathematics. 1 ship and 23 men versus hundreds of ships and tens of thousands of men. The equation was simple. The execution was impossible. What followed was 15 minutes that defined the word nightmare. Sherwood took the helm himself. His ribs screamed with every breath, but pain was just information now, data to be processed and ignored. He pushed the throttle forward. 3 knots. Straight into the funnel. The first mine passed 10 feet to starboard. Close enough that they could see the serial numbers stamped on its casing. German manufacture. Fresh. Probably deployed within the last 48 hours. The second mine scraped their hull. Everyone froze. That whisper of death, like fingernails on steel. The horn bent but didn't break. They kept moving. The third mine was directly ahead. Port 5 degrees, Sherwood commanded, his voice steady as a metronome. That'll put us into dash, port 5 degrees. They turned. The mine ahead passed safely. The mine they turned toward didn't. The explosion happened at 0514 hours. Not the mine itself, that missed them by inches. But the pressure wave from its detonation triggered the magnetic mine beneath them. HMS Speedwell jumped like a kicked dog. Her bow went up, her stern went down. Men flew through the air like dolls. The mast snapped. The wheelhouse windows exploded inward in a constellation of glass. Sherwood was thrown from the helm, his shoulder dislocating with a wet pop. He pulled himself up using his good arm, looked through the shattered window, and saw something that would stay with him forever. A corridor. The explosions had triggered a chain reaction. Mines were going off in sequence, each one triggering the next, creating a passage of churning water and smoke. They'd done it. By accident or providence, they'd cleared the channel, but Speedwell was dying. Abandoned ship, someone screamed. Belay that. Sherwood roared. We're not done. The ship was listing 20 degrees. Water poured through buckled plates. The engines were failing. But ahead, through the smoke and chaos, Sherwood could see clear water. They just had to make it another 300 yards. All hands to the pumps. Everyone who can stand, grab a bucket. They almost made it. 200 yards from safety, Speedwell's engines died. 100 yards from safety, she began to roll. 50 yards from safety, Sherwood gave the order he'd been avoiding. Abandon ship. And God help us all. They went into the channel at 0527 hours. 23 men in water that was 42 degrees Fahrenheit. In peacetime, that gave them maybe 20 minutes before hypothermia killed them. But this wasn't peacetime, and the water was full of oil from destroyed ships, burning in patches that turned the sea into a checkerboard of fire and ice. Sherwood was the last off Speedwell. Captain's tradition. He watched her roll onto her side, her red bottom showing like the belly of a dying whale. She'd been a fishing trawler once. She'd caught herring and mackerel. Now she was a casualty of war, another number in the Admiralty's calculations. But the mathematics weren't finished with John S. Sherwood. As he treaded water, his dislocated shoulder sending lightning bolts of agony with every stroke, he saw them coming. The evacuation fleet. Destroyers, passenger ferries, fishing boats, hundreds of vessels streaming through the channel. Speedwell had died to clear. The first destroyer almost ran them down. Her bow wave pushed them aside like debris. The captain never saw them. Why would he look for swimmers here? This was supposed to be a cleared channel. They can't see us, someone screamed. Sherwood watched the second destroyer approaching. Then the third. A wall of steel bearing down on 23 men who were invisible in the oil and wreckage. This was how it would end. Not from German mines or bullets, but from Allied ships that didn't know they were there. The irony was so perfect it almost made him laugh. Then he saw the child. No, not a child. A young soldier on the deck of a passing ferry, leaning over the rail, probably seasick. The boy's eyes met Sherwood's across 50 yards of water. For a moment, they just stared at each other, the drowning sailor and the evacuated soldier. Then the boy started screaming. Men overboard. Men overboard. Stop the ships. One voice in the chaos. It shouldn't have mattered. But someone heard. Then someone else. The word spread from ship to ship. Engines reversed. Boat stopped, they pulled Sherwood out at 0541 hours. Hypothermic, shoulder dislocated, 3 ribs broken, but alive. 18 of his crew made it. 5 didn't, lost in the oil and fire, their bodies never recovered. As they wrapped him in blankets on the deck of a destroyer, Sherwood watched the endless stream of ships passing through the channel. Each one carrying hundreds of soldiers. Thousands of men who would live because 23 sailors had done the mathematics. A young officer approached him. "You're heroes," he said. "You saved the evacuation." Sherwood looked at him with eyes that had seen too much. "We're not heroes. We're minesweepers. We did the arithmetic." But the arithmetic wasn't done. Sherwood was back on a minesweeper within 6 weeks. Different ship, same job. HMS Speedwell was replaced by HMS Steady, because the Navy had a dark sense of humor. His shoulder never healed properly. His ribs ached every time the pressure changed. But mines didn't care about your injuries. From June 1940 to May 1945, John S. Sherwood cleared mines from the Thames estuary to the Mediterranean. He survived the London Blitz, where German mines dropped by parachute turned the Thames into a minefield. He survived the Malta convoys, where mines were the least of your worries. He survived D-Day, where the Channel became a mine-infested nightmare all over again. The numbers were staggering. By war's end, British minesweepers had cleared over 50,000 mines. They'd lost 214 ships doing it. That's 1 ship for every 234 mines. The mathematics had been wrong, the job was even deadlier than predicted, but here's what the numbers don't tell you, what it does to a man's soul to wake up every morning knowing that today's the day the arithmetic catches up with you. To eat breakfast wondering if you'll see lunch. To write letters home knowing each one might be the last. Sherwood wrote a lot of letters. He wrote to the families of the 5 men who didn't make it out of the Channel that day in May. He wrote to his wife, telling her he was fine, leaving out the parts about the dislocated shoulder and broken ribs and the nightmares that came every time he closed his eyes. He wrote to the Admiralty, recommending medals for his crew, never mentioning himself, but there was one letter he never sent. He wrote it in 1943, after a particularly bad day when they lost 3 sweepers in 4 hours. It was addressed to nobody and everyone. You ask what it's like to be a minesweeper. It's like being a bomb disposal expert, except the bomb is underwater, you can't see it, it moves with the current, and you have to defuse it while sailing directly over it. It's knowing that every sunrise might be your last, but getting up anyway because someone has to do it. It's watching good men die for no dramatic reason, no heroic last stands, no glorious charges. Just there 1 second, gone the next. It's the arithmetic of war at its purest. Numbers in, numbers out, and pray you're not one of the subtractions, but mostly, it's necessary. Every mine we clear is a ship that doesn't sink, a crew that makes it home. We're not heroes. Heroes get remembered. We're the ones who make it possible for heroes to exist. The war ended on May 8, 1945. But for John S. Sherwood, it didn't end, because the mines were still there. German mines didn't care that Germany had surrendered. They sat on the seabed, patient as death, waiting for a magnetic signature or a careless contact. The British government estimated there were still 20,000 mines in British waters alone. Someone had to clear them. Guess who volunteered? "You've done enough," the Admiralty told him. 5 years is more than anyone should have to do this job. "The mines don't know the war's over," Sherwood replied. "Neither do the merchant ships that'll hit them." So he stayed. 1945 became 1946. Then 1947. While the world celebrated peace, John S. Sherwood and men like him continued the war against an enemy that never surrendered, the silent, waiting mines. Then came October 15, 1947. They were clearing mines off Dover. Routine operation. They'd done it 100 times. The mine was a standard German EMC, probably dropped in 1940. 7 years old, but still deadly. Something went wrong. Maybe the mine's mechanism had corroded in unexpected ways. Maybe someone made a tiny mistake. Maybe it was just time for the arithmetic to balance. The mine detonated 12 feet from their hull. Sherwood remembered flying through the air. He remembered hitting the water. He remembered thinking, with perfect clarity, so this is how it ends. He remembered nothing else for 3 days. He woke up in a hospital in Dover. Concussion, ruptured eardrum, compression fractures in his spine. The doctor, a young man who'd probably never heard a shot fired in anger, cheerfully told him he was lucky to be alive. Lucky, Sherwood repeated, tasting the word like something foreign. 19 of his crew had made it. 3 hadn't. The arithmetic again. The Navy gave him a medal and a medical discharge. Unfit for sea duty, the papers said. As if anyone who'd done what he'd done for 7 years could ever be fit again. He went home to Portsmouth. Got a job at the docks. He couldn't stay away from the sea, even though it had tried to kill him more times than he could count. Married his sweetheart, who'd waited 7 years for him to come home. Had children who would never understand why their father woke up screaming about mines that existed only in his nightmares. But here's the thing about John S. Sherwood that makes this story more than just another war tale. He never stopped counting every ship that came into Portsmouth Harbor. He'd watch it dock and think, that could have hit a mine. Every newspaper article about shipping, he'd calculate how many tons of cargo made it safely because of cleared channels. Every year on May 29th, he'd work out how many men had lived because 23 sailors had done the arithmetic. By his count, by 1990, the channel cleared at Dunkirk had saved approximately 338,000 lives. Not just the soldiers evacuated, but all the people those soldiers went on to save, and their children, and their children's children. The arithmetic of life, not death. In 1994, they invited him back to Dunkirk for the 50th anniversary. He was 76 years old. His spine was bent from compression fractures that never healed right. His hearing was shot from that last mine. His hands shook, not from age, but from 7 years of holding them steady while death whispered past. They wanted him to give a speech. Talk about heroism and sacrifice and the glory of serving king and country. Instead, he stood at the podium, looked out at the crowd of veterans and dignitaries, and said, "You want to know why you wouldn't last a day as a minesweeper? It's not because you're not brave enough. Everyone's brave when they have to be. It's because you're too human. To be a minesweeper, you have to become mathematics. You have to accept that you're a number in an equation, that your life is worth less than the lives you're saving. You have to watch friends die and keep working. You have to sail toward things that every instinct screams at you to sail away from. But most of all, you have to wake up every morning and choose to be subtracted, so that others can be added. I served with men who made that choice every day for years. Most of them aren't here because the arithmetic caught up with them. They weren't heroes. Heroes get parades. They were minesweepers. They got the job done." The crowd was silent. Someone started to clap, slowly, but Sherwood raised his hand. "Don't applaud," he said. "Remember. Remember that every free breath you take was paid for by someone who chose to be a number. Remember that peace is built on the bones of men who did arithmetic with their lives." John S. Sherwood died on March 12, 2001. He was 83. In his final days, his mind wandered. The nurses said he would call out coordinates, depths, sweep patterns. He was still clearing mines, 60 years after he'd started. At his funeral, they gave him full military honors. 21-gun salute. Flag on the coffin. All the ceremony the Navy could muster for one of its own, but the real tribute came from an unexpected source. The morning before the funeral, every ship in Portsmouth Harbor, military, commercial, private, sounded their horns at exactly 0527 hours. The exact time HMS Speedwell had been abandoned. The sound carried across the water, a cacophony that lasted exactly 60 seconds. One of the dock workers, not knowing what was happening, asked what all the noise was about. "It's the arithmetic," an old sailor told him. "They're balancing the books for John S. Sherwood. You see, That's why you wouldn't last a day as a Royal Navy minesweeper, not because you lack courage. Courage is common in war. Not because you lack skill. Skills can be taught. But because to do what John S. Sherwood did, you have to accept something that goes against every human instinct, that your life is an acceptable loss, that your death is part of someone else's survival equation, that every morning, you have to wake up and volunteer to be subtracted. The German mine that killed 12 men didn't explode properly. It just cracked their ship like an eggshell. But the mine that John S. Sherwood carried in his soul for 60 years, the weight of surviving when others didn't, the burden of doing necessary arithmetic with human lives, that one detonated perfectly. It just took a lifetime to count all the casualties, and that's the real reason you wouldn't last a day as a minesweeper. Because the job doesn't end when you leave the ship. It follows you home. It sits at your dinner table. It lies next to you in bed. It whispers numbers in your ear, how many saved, how many lost, how many times you beat the arithmetic, until one day, finally, mercifully, the counting stops. For John S. Sherwood, it took 60 years. For the 5 men who didn't make it out of the channel that day in May 1940, it took 15 minutes, who got the better end of that equation. Even John S. Sherwood never figured that out. But he kept clearing mines anyway, because someone had to do the arithmetic, and in war, arithmetic doesn't care. If you understand it just demands to be balanced, but there's more to John S. Sherwood's story. Parts that never made it into the official records. Parts that explain why, even decades after the war, he would stand at Portsmouth Harbor and watch every single ship with the intensity of a man still on duty. Let me tell you about the ghosts, not metaphorical ghosts. Not memories. The actual dead that John S. Sherwood swore he could see, standing on the water where their ships went down. It started in 1941, during the worst of the mine-laying campaign. The Germans were dropping magnetic mines by parachute at night, turning the Thames estuary into a killing field. Sherwood's crew was working 18-hour shifts, clearing mines by day, hunting for parachute mines by searchlight at night. Sleep deprivation does strange things to a man's mind. After 72 hours without rest, the boundaries between waking and sleeping start to dissolve. That's when Sherwood first saw them. He was standing watch at 0300 hours, scanning the water for the telltale silk of a parachute, when he saw a figure standing on the water. Not floating. Standing. It was wearing the uniform of a Royal Navy rating, but its face was wrong. Too pale. Too still. Sherwood rubbed his eyes. When he looked again, there were 5 of them. The 5 men who hadn't made it out of the channel 6 months earlier. They stood in formation on the water, watching him. "Sir." The helmsman's voice made him jump. "You all right, sir?" "Fine," Sherwood lied. "Just tired." But they came back. Every time he was exhausted, every time the job pushed him past human endurance, he'd see them. Standing on the water. Waiting. He never told anyone. What would he say? That he was seeing dead sailors. They'd pull him from duty, send him to a hospital, call him shell-shocked. And meanwhile, mines would keep killing ships because they were short one experienced sweeper captain. So he lived with the ghosts. Made peace with them, in a way. They became his alarm system. When he saw them, he knew he was pushing too hard, needed rest. They were his dead crew, still looking out for him, but the ghosts multiplied. Every minesweeper they lost added to the crowd. By 1943, he could see dozens of them on bad nights. A phantom fleet of the drowned, standing on water that had killed them, watching him with eyes that asked a question he couldn't answer. Why us and not you? The worst night was November 14, 1943. They were clearing a new type of mine, pressure mines that detected the water displacement of a ship passing overhead. Invisible, undetectable, unsweepable by conventional means. The only way to clear them was to trigger them with an old merchant ship, empty except for a skeleton crew who would try to abandon ship in the 30 seconds between trigger and detonation. It was murder with paperwork. But it was the only way. Sherwood was assigned to escort the sacrifice ship, a rust bucket freighter called the Mary Catherine. Her crew was 3 volunteers. Old sailors who'd lost everything in the bombing and figured they had nothing left to lose. The captain was 67 years old. His name was William Perkins. He'd been torpedoed twice already in the war, lost his son at Dunkirk, lost his wife in the London Blitz. When they asked why he volunteered for a suicide mission, he said, "I want to balance the books." Sherwood understood that. The war was all about balancing books. Deaths against lives. Ships lost against ships saved. The arithmetic that ruled everything. They found the pressure mine at 2,300 hours. It was perfectly positioned in the shipping lane. Any vessel over 500 tons would trigger it. The explosion would be visible from shore. "This is it then," Perkins said over the radio. His voice was steady. "We're going in." "Godspeed," Sherwood replied. What else could you say to a man sailing toward certain death? The Mary Catherine increased speed. 10 knots. 15. They needed momentum to carry them over the mine before it detonated. The 3-man crew stood at the rail, life jackets on, ready to jump, but they'd miscalculated. The mine went off directly under the Mary Catherine's engine room. She didn't have 30 seconds. She had 3. Sherwood watched the freighter disappear in a column of water and fire. One moment she was there, the next she was splinters. No time to abandon ship. No chance for the crew to jump. Just instantaneous deletion from existence. That night, 3 new ghosts joined the crowd on the water, but William Perkins didn't stand still like the others. He walked across the water to Sherwood's ship, climbed aboard, or seemed to, and stood next to him on the bridge. "Books aren't balanced yet," the ghost of William Perkins said. Or maybe Sherwood just thought he said it. Still work to do. From that night on, Sherwood was never alone on the bridge. Perkins became his constant companion. A ghost that only he could see, offering advice that might have been Sherwood's subconscious or might have been something else. "Pressure wave coming," Perkins would say, and Sherwood would order hard to port just as an underwater explosion rocked the space they'd just left. "Check the sweep gear," Perkins would suggest, and they'd find a fault that would have been fatal if not corrected. "That one's already dead," Perkins would whisper, pointing to a sailor, and 3 days later that man would step wrong, fall into a mine's path, and be vaporized. Madness. Perhaps. But it was madness that kept Sherwood alive through 1944, when Minesweeper casualties reached 40%. When the channel approaches to D-Day needed clearing and the Germans had laid new types of mines that seemed designed by the devil himself. June 5, 1944. The night before D-Day. Sherwood's flotilla was part of Operation Neptune, clearing lanes for the invasion fleet. 10 channels, each 2 miles wide, had to be cleared and marked before dawn. 5,000 ships would follow those channels. One uncleared mine could cause a cascade of disasters that might derail the entire invasion. No pressure. The ghost of William Perkins stood beside Sherwood as they entered the minefield. But now he wasn't alone. All of Sherwood's dead were there, every sailor he'd lost, every minesweeper who'd died on his watch. They filled the bridge, silent witnesses to what might be the last night of his life. "Big show tonight," Perkins commented. Or Sherwood imagined he commented. The distinction had long since ceased to matter. They found the first mine at 2,215 hours. Then the second. Then the third. The Germans had laid them in patterns designed to channel ships into kill zones. Clear one line, and you'd be forced into another. It was brilliant, in the cold way that weapons of war can be brilliant. "They're hurting you," Perkins observed. "Like sheep to slaughter." "I know. So don't be sheep." Sherwood understood. Instead of following the logical clearing pattern, he ordered his flotilla to work backwards, starting from what should have been the end point and working toward the beginning. It made no tactical sense. Which is why it worked. The Germans had anticipated logical British thinking. They hadn't anticipated John S. Sherwood's conversation with ghosts. WWII 0400 hours, they'd cleared 6 miles. 4 to go. Dawn was coming. The invasion fleet was approaching. They could hear the engines, thousands of ships carrying hundreds of thousands of men toward the beaches of Normandy. That's when they hit the acoustic mines, new type. Nobody had seen them before. They listened for engine noise, counted the ships passing overhead, and detonated under the 10th or 20th or 50th ship, whatever they'd been programmed for. The first one took out HMS Pelican. Sherwood watched her die, added her crew to his mental list of ghosts. The second one damaged HMS Shearwater but didn't sink her. The third was waiting for them. "It's counting," Perkins said. "Can you hear it counting?" Sherwood couldn't hear anything except engines and explosions and the screaming of men in the water. But somehow, yes, he could hear it counting. Each ship that passed was a number. His ship would be number 10. "Can't stop," he said aloud, not caring if his crew heard him talking to nothing. "Channel has to be cleared." "Then change the number," Perkins suggested. "Change the number." "How do you change the number on a mine that's counting ships? You give it something else to count." "Launch all boats," Sherwood ordered. "Every lifeboat, every raft, every piece of flotsam that can float. Space them 50 yards apart. Tow them through." His crew thought he'd gone mad. Maybe he had. But they followed orders, because in minesweeping, madness and genius were often indistinguishable. They launched everything that could float. Lifeboats, rafts, empty barrels, even the ship's dining tables thrown overboard. A parade of decoys, each one potentially triggering the counting mine. The 8th piece of debris triggered it. The explosion fountained water 100 feet high, would have destroyed any ship caught above it. But all it killed was an empty lifeboat and possibly Sherwood's last grip on sanity. "Well done," Perkins said. "Book's getting closer to balanced." They finished clearing the channel at 0547 hours. 13 minutes before the first landing craft entered it, Sherwood stood on his bridge, watching the invasion fleet stream past. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, landing craft, the largest seaborne invasion in human history, sailing through channels cleared by exhausted men who talked to ghosts. "Look at them all," Perkins marveled. "All alive because of what you did." "What we did," Sherwood corrected. "The living and the dead. We all did it." His executive officer found him like that, having a conversation with empty air, tears streaming down his face. The XO quietly took command, let Sherwood have his breakdown or breakthrough or whatever it was. The war had one more year to run. One more year of mines and ghosts and arithmetic. Sherwood cleared mines off Normandy, off Holland, in the Scheldt estuary where the water was so thick with mines that they were finding new ones faster than they could clear old ones. WWII 1945, the ghosts outnumbered the living on his ship. Every bridge watch, every mine clearing operation, they were there. His invisible crew, the accumulated dead of 5 years of minesweeping. They offered advice, warnings, sometimes just companionship in the loneliest job in the Navy. Other sailors started to notice. Not the ghosts, those only Sherwood could see. But they noticed their captain's uncanny ability to detect mines, to predict patterns, to know things he couldn't possibly know. "How did you know that mine was there, sir?" a young ensign asked after Sherwood had ordered an emergency course change that avoided an unmarked mine by feet. "Experience," Sherwood lied. He couldn't say, "The ghost of a dead minesweeper told me." They'd lock him up, but the truth was both simpler and more complex. The ghosts were his experience. Every dead minesweeper, every lost crew member, had taught him something in their dying. Their deaths were lessons written in blood and salt water. The ghosts were just his mind's way of accessing those lessons. Or so he told himself. The war ended, but the ghosts didn't leave. They followed him home to Portsmouth. They stood in his garden. They sat at his kitchen table. They watched him try to return to normal life and fail, because how do you explain to your wife that you eat breakfast with dead sailors every morning? "Who are you talking to?" she'd ask when she caught him mumbling to empty rooms. "Just thinking out loud," he'd say, but she knew. Wives of sailors always know. She'd wake up to find him standing at the window at 3 a.m., having animated conversations with nothing. She'd find him setting extra places at the dinner table, then looking confused when she asked who was coming. "The boys," he'd say, then catch himself. "Sorry. I forgot they're not coming." She tried to get him help. Doctors, psychiatrists, even a medium who claimed she could banish unwanted spirits. But Sherwood didn't want them banished. They were his crew. They died under his command, or alongside him, or in places he should have been. They had earned the right to haunt him. 1954. 10 years after D-Day, Sherwood was working at the Portsmouth docks, supervising cargo loading. Safe job. No mines. No ghosts, or so he thought, but ships carry memories, and every vessel that came into Portsmouth had sailed through waters that Sherwood had cleared. Waters where his friends had died. Waters that were graveyards disguised as shipping lanes. One day, a freighter came in from Rotterdam. Nothing special about her, just another cargo ship. But when Sherwood saw her name, Mary Catherine II, something broke inside him. She wasn't the same ship. The original Mary Catherine had been vaporized in 1943. But someone had named a new ship after her, and seeing that name brought William Perkins back in full force. "Books still aren't balanced," Perkins said, standing next to Sherwood on the dock. "Still work to do." "The war's over," Sherwood whispered. "War's never over for minesweepers. You know that. Mines are still out there. Waiting." He was right. The papers occasionally carried stories: fishing boat lost to wartime mine, cargo ship damaged by explosive presumed to be from World War II. The war was over, but its weapons lived on. That night, Sherwood made a decision. He couldn't go back to minesweeping. His body was too broken, his mind too fractured. But he could do something else. He could remember. He could record. He could make sure the arithmetic was never forgotten. He started writing. Not memoirs, those would have been sanitized, edited, made palatable for public consumption. He wrote the truth. Every death, every mine, every ghost. He wrote about the mathematics of sacrifice, the cold equations that determined who lived and who died. He wrote about the sound a mine makes when it scrapes your hull. He wrote about watching friends vaporize. He wrote about the ghosts that came for tea. His wife found the manuscript after he'd filled 3 notebooks. She read them in one night, crying at the kitchen table while Sherwood slept upstairs, mumbling coordinates in his dreams. "My God," she whispered. "I never knew. You never told me. You never asked," said William Perkins, though of course she couldn't hear him. The notebooks multiplied. 5, 10, 20. Sherwood wrote obsessively, documenting every mine cleared, every ship lost, every ghost gained. He created charts showing the correlation between mine types and casualty rates. He mapped every minefield from memory, noting which ships died where. He was creating a memorial that no one would ever see. A monument made of words and numbers, dedicated to men whose names appeared in no history books. "Why doesn't anyone know about us?" Perkins asked one night. "Why don't the history books mention minesweepers?" "Because we did our job too well," Sherwood replied. "Nobody remembers the disasters that didn't happen." That became his mission, to make people remember the disasters that didn't happen because someone had prevented them. Every ship that docked safely in Portsmouth was a disaster that didn't happen. Every ton of cargo delivered was a disaster that didn't happen. The arithmetic of prevention. The mathematics of what didn't occur. 1974. 30 years after D-Day, Sherwood was invited to a D-Day commemoration. They wanted surviving veterans to share their stories. The focus was on the beaches, the paratroopers, the grand sweep of history. Nobody mentioned the minesweepers. Sherwood sat in the audience, surrounded by his ghosts, 50 of them now, maybe more. He'd stopped counting, and listened to speeches about courage and sacrifice and the price of freedom. When they asked if any veterans wanted to speak, he stood up. "I want to tell you about the men you've never heard of," he began. The room fell silent. There was something in his voice, authority, pain, truth, that commanded attention. Before the first landing craft hit the beaches, before the first paratrooper jumped, men in converted fishing boats sailed into minefields to clear paths for the invasion fleet. 1 in 3 of them died. You've never heard their names. There are no movies about them. No monuments to them. They died at sea, in explosions so complete that there were no bodies to bury. They died doing arithmetic, calculating that their lives were worth less than the thousands of lives they were saving. I want you to remember them. Not as heroes. They weren't trying to be heroes. They were trying to solve math problems that used human lives as variables. Next time you see a ship safely entering harbor, remember that someone, somewhere, died to clear the mine that wasn't there. Remember the disasters that didn't happen. Remember the arithmetic. He sat down to complete silence. Then, slowly, one person clapped. Then another. Then the entire room, but Sherwood wasn't listening. He was listening to William Perkins, who said, "Books are getting closer to balanced." John S. Sherwood spent his last years trying to balance those books. By the 1990s, Sherwood was the last survivor of his original crew. The last men who remembered HMS Speedwell. The last witness to 23 men who chose to sail into a funnel of mines to save an evacuation. The ghosts were still with him. They'd aged with him, in a way. Perkins no longer stood straight and military. He slouched, like an old man with too many memories. The others had faded to whispers, but they were still there, still counting. On March 10, 2001, 2 days before his death, Sherwood asked for his notebooks. 57 volumes now, filled with names and dates and coordinates. His life's work. His monument to the forgotten arithmetic of war. Burn them, he told his son. What? Dad, no. This is history. This needs to be preserved. No. It needs to end. The counting needs to stop. But his son couldn't do it. After Sherwood died, he donated the notebooks to the Imperial War Museum. They sit in an archive now, rarely read, occasionally studied by historians interested in the mechanical details of mine warfare. They don't mention the ghosts, but if you read them carefully, if you pay attention to the margins where Sherwood scribbled notes to himself, you can see them. References to WP suggests, and the boys say, and standing watch with the full crew tonight. The arithmetic of madness, perhaps. Or the arithmetic of memory made manifest. The truth, as John S. Sherwood knew it, was simpler. Every mine cleared was a life saved, every life saved was a debt incurred, every debt had to be balanced, and in the end, the books never balance. They just stopped being counted. For John S. Sherwood, they stopped on March 12, 2001, at 0527 hours, the exact time HMS Speedwell was abandoned. The ghosts, presumably, went with him, but the mines are still out there. Waiting. Patient as death, doing their own arithmetic in the dark waters of history.